How would I be disrespecting her culture? Is that not my culture?
You don't have a f***ing culture!
I don't?
No, you don't!
Oh.
We're f***ing white, we don't have a goddamn f***ing culture!
Are you?
This video is centered around an article that one of my subscribers was kind enough to send me recently, so thank you for that. The article is so well written, so poignant, so accurate and conspicuously honest that it would be a mistake for me to just tweet it and for people to ignore it as too long didn't read. So I want to make sure it reaches the larger audience that it deserves. It goes right to the very heart of the treachery that has been committed against the European mind by our governments, and it needs to be heard. Until we have a firm grasp of what ails us as a civilization, we will continue to fight in vain to recover from it. How a Generation Lost Its Common Culture by Patrick Deneen, Professor of Constitutional Studies at Notre Dame. My students are know-nothings. They are exceedingly nice, pleasant, trustworthy, mostly honest, well-intentioned and utterly decent. But their brains are largely empty, devoid of any substantial knowledge that might be the fruits of an education in an inheritance and a gift of a previous generation. They are the culmination of Western civilization, a civilization that has forgotten nearly everything about itself, and as a result has achieved near-perfect indifference to its own culture. It's difficult to gain admissions to the schools where I've taught, Princeton, Georgetown, and now Notre Dame. Students at these institutions have done what has been demanded of them. They are superb test takers. They know exactly what is needed to get an A in every class, meaning that they rarely allow themselves to become passionate and invested in any one subject. They build superb resumes. They are respectful and cordial to their elders, though easygoing if crude with their peers. They respect diversity without having the slightest clue what diversity is, and they are experts in the arts of non-judgmentalism, at least publicly. They are the cream of their generation, the masters of the universe, a generation in waiting to run America and the world. But ask them some basic questions about the civilization they will be inheriting, and be prepared for averted eyes and somewhat panicked looks. Who fought in the Peloponnesian War? Who taught Plato, and whom did Plato teach? How did Socrates die? Raise your hand if you have read both the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Canterbury Tales? Paradise Lost? The Inferno? Who was Saul of Tarsus? What were the 95 Theses? Who wrote them, and what was their effect? Why does the Magna Carta matter? How and where did Thomas Becket die? Who was Guy Fawkes, and why is there a day named after him? What did Lincoln say in his second inaugural? His first inaugural? How about his third inaugural? What are the Federalist Papers? Some students, due most often to serendipitous class choices or a quirky old-fashioned teacher, might know a few of these answers, but most students have not been educated to know them. At best, they possess accidental knowledge, but otherwise are masters of systematic ignorance. It is not their fault for pervasive ignorance of Western and American history, civilization, politics, art and literature. They have learned exactly what we have asked of them, to be like mayflies, alive by happenstance in a fleeting present. Our students' ignorance is not a failing of the educational system, it is its crowning achievement. Efforts by several generations of philosophers and reformers and public policy experts, whom our students and most of us know nothing about, have combined to produce a generation of know-nothings. The pervasive ignorance of our students is not a mere accident or unfortunate but correctable outcome, if only we hire better teachers or tweak the reading lists in high school. It is the consequence of a civilizational commitment to civilizational suicide. The end of history for our students signals the end of history for the West. During my lifetime, lamentation over student ignorance has been sounded by the likes of E.D. Hirsch, Alan Bloom, Mark Bauerlein and Jay Leno, among many others. But these lamentations have been leavened with the hope that appeal to our and their better angels might reverse the trend. That's an allusion to Lincoln's first inaugural address, by the way. Edie Hirsch even worked up a self-help curriculum, a do-it-yourself guide on how to become culturally literate. Imbued with the can-do American spirit that cultural defenestration could be reversed by a good reading list in the appendix. Broadly missing is sufficient appreciation that this ignorance is the intended consequence of our educational system, a sign of its robust health and success. We have fallen into the bad and unquestioned habit of thinking that our educational system is broken, but it is working on all cylinders. What our educational system aims to produce is cultural amnesia, a wholesale lack of curiosity, historyless free agents, and educational goals composed of content-free processes and unexamined buzzwords like critical thinking, diversity, ways of knowing, social justice, and cultural competence. Our students are the achievement of a systemic commitment to producing individuals without a past for whom the future is a foreign country, cultureless ciphers who can live anywhere and perform any kind of work without inquiring about its purposes or ends, perfected tools for an economic system that prizes flexibility, geographic, interpersonal, ethical. In such a world, possessing a culture, a history, an inheritance, a commitment to a place and particular people, specific forms of gratitude and indebtedness, rather than a generalized and deracinated commitment to social justice, a strong set of ethical and moral norms that assert definite limits to what one ought and ought not to do, aside from being judgmental, are hindrances and handicaps. Regardless of major or course of study, the main object of modern education is to sand off remnants of any cultural or historical specificity and identity that might still stick to our students, to make them perfect company men and women for a modern polity and economy that penalizes deep commitments. Efforts first to foster appreciation for multiculturalism signaled a dedication to eviscerate any particular cultural inheritance, while the current fad of diversity signals thoroughgoing commitment to decultured and relentless homogenization. Above all, the one overarching lesson that students receive is the true end of education. The only essential knowledge is to know ourselves to be radically autonomous selves within a comprehensive global system with a common commitment to mutual indifference. Our commitment to mutual indifference is what binds us together as a global people. Any remnant of a common culture would interfere with this prime directive. A common culture would imply that we share something thicker, an inheritance that we did not create, and a set of commitments that imply limits and particular devotions. Ancient philosophy and practice praised as an excellent form of government a res publica, a devotion to public things, things we share together. We have instead created the world's first res idiotica, from the Greek word idiotes, meaning private individual. Our education system produces solipsistic, self-contained selves whose only public commitment is an absence of commitment to a public, a common culture, a shared history. They are perfectly hollowed vessels, receptive and obedient, without any real obligations or devotions. They won't fight against anyone because that's not seemly, but they won't fight for anyone or anything either. They are living in a perpetual Truman Show, a world constructed yesterday that is nothing more than a set for their solipsism without any history or trajectory. I love my students. Like any human being, each has enormous potential and great gifts to bestow upon the world. But I weep for them, for what is rightfully theirs but hasn't been given. On our best days, I discern their longing and anguish, and I know that their innate human desire to know who they are, where they have come from, where they ought to go, and how they ought to live will always reassert itself. But even on those better days, I can't help but hold the hopeful thought that the world they have inherited, a world without inheritance, without past, future, or deepest cares, is about to come tumbling down, and that this collapse would be the true beginning of a real education. So that's the end of the article. Our job as a movement is to shine a light on the troubles of our people, and there is no greater trouble than the enforced amnesia, as detailed in the article, of who we Europeans really are. We live in a society where dependence on two incomes has made it a rare thing indeed for a man to be able to support his family and have his wife homeschool their children. So school is now as much of a babysitting service as it is anything else. Weakening parental influence over the lives of children has perhaps been the greatest victory of the modern, multicultural, globalist state. To this, add an anti-white media and political culture, feminism and political correctness, and you have a toxic mix indeed for any semblance of white identity. Our children are taught to respect the identity of others and pay no attention to their own. They are taught that they are not of a certain tribe, or that their tribe is so potentially evil that even to talk of it is to revive the spectres of the past. What our children are missing is an education about who they are, who we are, where we come from and where we need to be going. In short, they are being taught not to be themselves but to be global citizens, to be uniform workers who serve a nameless, formless creed of consumerism and diversity, to be people divorced from their ancestors and who teach the new culture of conformity to their offspring, to be people who consider curiosity a social indelicacy and the discussion of awkward truths social suicide, to be people at ease in a world where the only contrasting shades come in the form of the rainbow banner of mandatory tolerance. I have said many times that if you don't play identity politics will play you. And I think this is such an important truth for us to understand. I really hope Jordan Peterson is watching this. I really hope Sargon is watching this. This modern obsession with individualism is a completely inadequate response to the perils of the modern era. It is like trying to put out a fire with petrol. And this is a uniquely Western affliction. And Sargon et al. Are doing a terrible disservice to our people by luring them further into this trap of disconnection and isolation. To see the absolute lunacy of where these so-called liberalists are, I want to play you a short clip of a recent event at which Sargon was a panel member.
It's very difficult because, I mean, Jewish people do very well in our societies. You know, they're often, and that's to their credit, they work hard. You know, it's not that this is illegitimately gained. But then I can see why people are resentful that successful, rich, well-off people who are well-connected, who are socially very advanced, are then playing the game of identity politics as well. I can see why it doesn't seem fair. You know, it seems like an unfair defense, an unfair advantage that they have. And that's not a common... like, if someone would say, well, that's an anti-Semitic thing to say, it would sound to me like someone criticizing feminism being called a misogynist. You know, to me, it's just another brand of identity politics. But it's not an indictment of Jewish people. It's not to suggest that they've done, you know, nothing wrong by playing identity politics. Everyone, I think, is playing identity politics, is doing something wrong inherently. But it is an issue that I think a lot of people do notice. And I think it is something that has to have an honest conversation regarding it. They've got to be honest. You can't just shout people down when they point this out, because it is a real thing they're pointing out. Jewish people are very smart. They work very hard. Of course they're successful. If we want to even have any idea that we're living in a meritocracy, if Jews weren't succeeding in our societies, they must be being held back. But they're not. They're doing great because they're not being held back, because they do work hard, because they are smart. We need Jewish people, unfortunately for them, have got to drop the identity politics. I'm sorry about the Holocaust, but I don't give a shit. I'm sorry.
The ignorance and arrogance of this clip are truly breathtaking. From where does he get the moral authority to tell anyone to cease being a loyal member of their ethnic group? And why would any successful ethnicity with a strong in-group preference want to trade its success for the delusion that collective identity doesn't matter? I think Alan Dershowitz has something to tell us about the likely response to such a proposition.
People say Jews are too powerful, we're too strong, we're too rich, we control the media, we have too much this, we have too much that. And we often apologetically deny our strength and our power. Don't do that. Don't do that. We have earned the right to influence public debate. We have earned the right to be heard. We have contributed disproportionately to the success of this country. Never, ever apologize for using our strength and our influence in the interest of peace. And if you need a biblical source for it, just remember the psalmist who said, Hashem oz li'amo yitain. God will give the Jewish people strength, oz. And then, only then, Hashem yivarech et amo b'shalom. Only then will God give the Jewish people peace. Peace will come for the Jewish people and the Jewish nation only through strength. Never apologize for using your strength for peace. Thank you.
So whose vision of the political future do you think will prevail? The collective culture, history, and identity of the European peoples are the bedrock upon which this radical individualism rests. How bad do things have to get for Europeans before they realize that this obsession with the individual is the very thing that has created the vacuum at the heart of our civilization? For the answer to that question, I will refer back to Patrick Deneen's article, and I quote, "I can't help but hold the hopeful thought that the world they have inherited, a world without inheritance, without past, future, or deepest cares, is about to come tumbling down, and that this collapse would be the true beginning of a real education." Until next time, be well.